I've been in rural healthcare settings for the last 20 years, and 7 of those years were as a CIO. And throughout the presentation, I'll be giving some things that I've learned along the way and things that I've learned since I've left the hospital that'll hopefully help you. On our agenda, we're going to take a look at streamlining resources efficiently, simplifying cybersecurity strategies, addressing AI threats and challenges, and implementing AI policies for rural hospitals. The picture on the right is a rural hospital. I mean, your hospital may not be as isolated as this one, but sometimes you can feel that way with all of the things you have to do on a day-to-day basis and limited resources. And hopefully some of the information will give you some ideas to where hopefully that's not a feeling going forward. When we take a look at healthcare cybersecurity, we really have to take a look at the evolution. And cybersecurity has really been around since 1975 when computer viruses were first theorized. But we didn't start thinking about cybersecurity in healthcare until much later. Even with privacy regulations and HIPAA and high tech and the security that came along with that, a lot of times these became check the box exercises for a lot of organizations to where we were implementing, but there were no thought to cybersecurity and how those things impacted the business. Until somewhere around 2017 when ransomware started to come about. And that's really when cybersecurity began to get traction. Now, I got originally into cybersecurity back in 2008. And when you're looking at the early 2000s, a lot of what we were doing then was implementing firewalls or content filters. And cybersecurity was really putting rules in place to protect the organization. A lot has changed since then. And looking at the solutions that we implemented back in the early 2000s, and this is just an example, there are many different technologies that are out there, but when you look at firewalls, antivirus, and content filtering in the early 2000s, they really had a specific implementation or focus. The picture on the right shows that. So you have a firewall or an antivirus, and a firewall really did firewalling. Antiviruses really did just antivirus. And then your content filter just did content filtering. So as you can see, they are best of breed implementations is really where we started. Everything was purpose driven. Things that we were adopting were to meet a purpose. And your applications tended to be isolated. They didn't communicate to each other. And they really came with limited feature sets. So again, if you take a look at a firewall, really what a firewall was doing was just firewalling. It was protecting traffic going in and out of the network. And now we get to present and we start looking at what's driving cybersecurity adoption. And cyber insurance is one of the main things that's driving adoption. Regulations are also driving adoption. So HIPAA and high tech, we really didn't get the traction that we needed with cybersecurity with HIPAA and with high tech. We made some progress, but there was still some room for opportunity for improvement. And we've seen over the last 3 years, cyber insurance sending out questionnaires asking us things like, are you doing multi-factor authentication? What kind of email filtering are you doing? Are you encrypting your backups? Are your backups immutable or offline, air-gapped? Are you implementing privileged access manager? What about endpoint detection and response? So we've gone beyond antivirus to go into EDR or MDR or even XDR. Patch management, how are you keeping things up to date? Cyber incident response, planning and testing. Cybersecurity awareness, how are you hardening your desktops? Do you have baselines? What logging and monitoring are you doing? End of life systems. And then even vendor and digital supply chain. I know one of my last years when I was at the hospital, I got a questionnaire and it asked how many domain admin accounts you have. I believe this was in the end of 22, and I responded it was a little over 10. And that was followed up with a 20-page questionnaire digging really into our cybersecurity because the insurance wanted less than 10 accounts. And those are the things that we've been seeing over the past few years, and it continues. And this is really a lot of the reason that we have been adopting cybersecurity regulation and cyber insurance.
Yeah, Jonathan, this is Laura. Oh, sorry, I thought you wanted me to jump in here.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so we recently hosted a webinar where we dove into those 12 controls that Jonathan just mentioned. And we did that with a cyber liability insurance carrier. So they shared, what does it really mean if you're meeting some of those controls or only part of them? What things can you do to be put in the favorable pile, if you will, and how that impacts your premium. So if you want a copy of that recording, you're welcome to have that. If you want to email us at customersfirst@gocloudwave.com, or just put it in the questions pane that you'd like a copy, and we'll get that to you. It was quite enlightening to hear, what it means to meet some of those controls and strategies that you can do if you aren't able to do that. So let us know if you'd like a copy of that recording.
Thank you, Laura. I know that at the end of 22, one of the questions was, are you implementing MFA? And our insurance carrier actually told us that if we did not have MFA implemented by the end of the year, that our insurance would triple or we would be dropped. So I think probably many of you have experienced these things, and that recorded presentation would be a good way to see what's current. So if we take a look at the past and now we're looking at the present, the security controls are actually overlapping. So we went from a best of breed to where we had these specific functions for the applications and the appliances to now where we have things like a next generation firewall. And again, this is only one example of many different things inside of IT. Gartner recently did a report that showed that most organizations, most hospitals have at least 16 different security applications. And they find that only 23% of those applications are being used. And the reason for that is because we have things like our next generation firewall, and these firewalls are doing a lot of the things that we had those independent systems for. So we have firewalls that do content filtering, antivirus, malware, and more. And so what we find is over time, if you look on the right, you have this application that's now doing all of these different things. But unfortunately, we have 15 or 16 of these that are overlapping. So we really are inappropriately using our resources. We have implemented mainly a best of breed, and we still are holding on to those best of breed in a lot of cases. And we have a lot of redundancy, and our systems are disjointed. And it creates a lot of overhead and a lot of management to keep these products up to date. So when we look at our future and where we want to be, we want to streamline our cybersecurity initiatives. We want to focus on that streamlining and removing the overlapping systems. We want to maintain a defense in depth. So we still need defense in depth, but we need appropriate security. We don't want to implement so many controls that there's redundancy and waste. We need to move away from risk assessments and look more at cybersecurity maturity. This is looking at what your present state is now and looking at what your future state needs to be. Risk assessments tend to be more of a check the box exercise where we're looking to see if we meet certain controls, do we have certain policies in place? And there's a better way to do it. Maturity modeling was actually developed by the Department of Energy, and it's used to rapidly assess your maturity, your cybersecurity maturity. It was used to look at the cybersecurity maturity of the electric companies. And it's one example of how you can look at maturity modeling to tell what your current state is rapidly and determine what you need to do or focus on. Risk assessments don't give us that. So we need to move our risk assessments more to maturity modeling and move it from a check the box exercise to helping us develop strategy that's going to help us improve our cybersecurity maturity. And that's where we need to focus, is on that cybersecurity maturity, looking at the overall, all of the systems, how they're interacting, and how we're going to maximize the resources that we have while addressing the risks, because we still have to focus on the risks. And it's very important that as we do this, that we do our risk assessments and we determine how these risks are going to impact the organization. What our controls are going to bring into the organization. What are they going to impact? Do our controls align with the business goals? Are the controls appropriate? And we need to move away from implementing security solutions and controls to check the box. It really should be based on the cybersecurity maturity. And then we need to focus on risk management. One way to do that is with a CISO or a virtual CISO. I know in a rural hospital, it's hard to get more resources. It may be impossible to get a VISO or a CISO. But we need to focus on how we're going to make that happen. And we're going to look at the org structure in a little bit about best practice to set that up and the reasons to do that. We also need to look at risk management from an organization level versus a department level. Cybersecurity tends to be an IT function or focus, and that's not very effective. We need to do this from an organization level. We need all of the hospital to participate, whether it be tabletop exercises or other planning, business continuity planning. It needs to be organizational level versus department level. And it's really going to depend on the organization's culture. Looking at the org chart on the left, this is not a representation of every org chart or what may be in your hospital, but this is a standard org chart for a hospital where you have a CIO, and the CIO may report to the COO or CEO. Now, this may be a director in some smaller hospitals and not a CIO, but serve in similar functions, because what we find in a rural hospital is you tend to have multiple roles. And in the CIO org chart on the left, we have a director of clinical apps, and you may have another director of technical apps, and maybe even a director of project management. And it may vary from organization to organization, but you have some similar structure to this. And then you have your staff, like your technical staff and your clinical staff underneath their respective directors. But in this type of a organization chart, what happens is somebody in the IT department is doing the cybersecurity. It's either going to be the CIO as the security officer, or maybe one of the technical directors, or maybe even one of the staff is the cybersecurity analyst. But that really presents issues because the role is really conflicting. A CIO should be focused on business continuity, keeping the business operational and keeping it running effectively. And when you add in cybersecurity, that's really an opposing opinion or goals. They have opposing goals. So what you may want to think about is a target organization chart on the right. And in this target organization chart, you can see there's a CISO or a VISO. And what we've done is we've split out cybersecurity from the IT department, because again, it is more of a conflicting role. And appropriately, this could report to any, just like either one of these org charts could report directly to the CEO, or it could go to any other C-suite position that the organization has determined. But on the right-hand side, the CISO or VISO reporting to the COO allows that business mindset and business goals to oversee what cybersecurity strategy you are implementing. And when we talk about cybersecurity maturity is more represented by the right organization chart. This is where the organization truly understands that cybersecurity is important, and really it should, in best case, be outside of the IT department, because if a security analyst reports to the CIO, then the CIO is responsible for both cyber events and business continuity, business impact, and depending on the situation, the right appropriate control may not be selected. When we look at the challenges, we've talked about some of the goals and things that we need to be doing. And when we look at the challenges to rural hospitals, comparing it to larger or corporate hospitals, when I was a CIO, I always said that the rural hospitals have to do everything that the large hospitals have to do, except for we have less people. There's no corporate structure creating your policies. Even getting projects approved tends to happen and be a simpler process, in my experience, in a rural environment. And what that leads to is you have less resources to implement the same number of controls, the same number of policies, and you're buying things a lot of times very rapidly. You're nimble, you move quickly. That's a great thing about working in a rural hospital, but it is a challenge. Whereas you compare it to a corporate hospital and there are a lot more processes to go through. Again, in a rural hospital, it may be that you go to the IT steering committee and get approval. And from there, there's a purchase and implementation. It could be as simple as going straight from a director to the admin team. So this is a challenge. Financial pressures. I really don't have to talk too much about financial pressures. We're all aware of financial pressures, declining reimbursements, uncompensated care, high fixed cost, and things just year to year, it seems like we're a little more looking at the budget, trying to figure out ways to cut the budget, maintain all of our controls, meet our goals, and do it with less money. And these are not all challenges. These are the highlight challenges that came to top of mind. And the last one I have is difficulty attracting and retaining staff. Now, I was in a rural hospital. It was 115 beds, and it was about 50 minutes away from Atlanta. And that presented challenges because we were not competing. We were competing with Atlanta for talent, but we weren't competing salary-wise. And I found there were a few situations that I ran into when trying to attract staff that made it very difficult. The first thing I learned was you had a couple of different options on who you could bring in. One of those things was someone who has experience. And in my experience, and I've seen this in the hospital I was at, and I've seen it in other hospitals I talked to, is if you bring someone in an experience, what I found is they tend to last less than 2 years. If you're in a rural environment, a lot of times the talent is either coming from a local school system or maybe even a government position. And I believe the reason that tenure is less than 2 years has to do with the high pace, high demand, sometimes stressful environment that healthcare can be. And my experience was staff that came in with that experience outside working, and when they came in, when they took a look at the salary and they took a look at what they were being asked to do, a lot of them didn't last more than 2 years. The other thing I found was your other option is to develop your own staff. And my experience with developing your own staff is it takes 5 to 7 years for you to bring someone up and get them proficient. And it just takes time. But within 7 to 10 years, opportunities opened up for those same employees. So I found that employees that I trained and worked with and got proficient tended to last between 7 and 10 years. Now, these two examples were not all of the staff. Obviously, there's going to be some staff that stick with you and love the hospital environment, love the hometown environment, and aren't going to leave. But in a lot of cases, there's turnover based on the two things I told you. So difficulty attracting and retaining staff is a major challenge for rural hospitals. And you may find, what you find is those employees that do end up lifers in a hospital that have 20 to 30 years working in the IT department, they become single points of failure. They're so valuable to the organization that if anything happens to that person, the hospital is going to be struggling because they've done so much and are really one of the pillars of the IT department. So what can we do with all of this? And the main thing we got to do is we got to start now. We can't let the day-to-day and the criticality of everything we do hold us back from taking a look at the increased threats to healthcare that we're seeing. We recently seen Change Healthcare in the incident that happened with Change Healthcare and how that impacted healthcare. And we see the involvement the FBI had with going after Black Cat, the group that's responsible for that. And you may have seen, or may not, that Black Cat's one of the leaders has actually come out and said, I want you to target hospital infrastructure. So the threat is real and it's increasing. 2024, there are a lot of challenges and threats to the cybersecurity of healthcare. We're directly being targeted more now than we have in the past. Regulation changes. When you take a look at what HHS is doing and you take a look at what the state of New York is doing, they've actually moved to pass regulation to where cybersecurity is going to be more in these states, to where there are certain provisions you have to meet. So we need to be ahead and go ahead and start thinking about these things and putting things in place so we're prepared when these regulations come. We can see from what's happening in the market and things that's happening throughout the states, it's no question to me that regulation is going to drive cybersecurity more. You see it with the SEC and what's been done there, and we're going to see it in healthcare. We have to strategize to streamline and minimize the waste. We got to look at those overlapping systems. I know in my experience, I had a SIEM and a SOC, and there were 15 different applications, just like that Gartner report has told us. 15 to 16 different applications that you're trying to maintain that are all sending into the SIEM. And we've got to figure out how to streamline that, how to minimize that. And I'll give you some solutions for that here shortly. We've got to select vendors that can address multiple risks. So it may be time to look at different vendors. If you've got an antivirus and it does all this DLP and other features, but you've got a DLP product, is it possible to consolidate those down into one product? Is there one company that does SIEM, SOC, and identity, or IDS and IPS? And looking for vendors that can take a look and focus holistically on your solutions. When we go back and we talk about maturity and we look at how we're going to streamline, and is a risk appropriate or is a control appropriate, we may be over installing security. It's all based on the risk assessment. So you need to look at it holistically and find a solution that looks at it holistically to make sure it's meeting the business goals while still streamlining and not implementing too many controls. We need to evaluate cybersecurity maturity with cybersecurity maturity modeling. And we talked about the different ways to do that. So if you don't have opportunity to do that on your own, there are organizations out there that can help you come in and do maturity modeling. And we really need to move to that. So you may need to engage a trusted partner. One of the things I'm finding as I go out and work with different hospitals is I find the same thing over and over. A lot of hospitals are limited on resources, and cybersecurity hit us so rapidly from the 2017 stage and the way things are being asked now. It seems like there's multiple products every year you have to implement, but we don't have the resources to do that. So it may be necessary to engage a trusted partner to bring in a team. In my experience, finding PRN or finding interns really didn't work well because you spend your time working with them to get them up to speed. So finding a trusted partner that has healthcare expertise is critical to being able to bridge the gap and help you get caught up, because I think a lot of cases we're playing catch up. We've got the day-to-day that we have to deal with. We have the critical issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times I find that employee that's been in your organization for 20 years is usually putting out fires all day long. And engaging a trusted partner is an opportunity for you to bring in a team that can relieve some of that pressure and allow your staff to train other members to reduce that single point of failure. And having someone that has a holistic viewpoint, that has experience across cybersecurity to be able to come in and help you reduce down the number of systems and the overlapping systems and the complexity, because things have gotten so complex. Now we're almost too complex, and with increased complexity is reduced cybersecurity. So there's a trade-off, and it goes into the configuration and how difficult it is to maintain. So there's a lot of value that can be added by bringing in a trusted partner that can bring all these things to the table and help in an environment where we can't get the additional resources. And it may be that we are right-sized and we are staffed appropriately. We just need some assistance to get us through and get us caught up. All right, so we have a quick poll before we jump into AI, and this is to talk about what extent you have adopted AI in your organization. So Cody's going to put that up on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get started. I apologize. To what extent have you adopted AI in your organization? So go ahead and select one of those. Adopted AI in certain departments, evaluating where to adopt, have not yet adopted, and no plans to adopt. I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds and then I'll share the results. Okay, I do say this every time we give a poll, and I always say, thank you for responding. You guys are really great, but you guys really are great. I'm going to go ahead and just leave this open for 2 or 3 more seconds because pretty much everybody has voted already. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'll share those results. So it looks like about 6% of you have adopted AI in certain departments, 25% are evaluating, 56% have not yet, and 13% say no plans.
Yeah, and that's really what I expected to see or hear, Cody, is that it's really a new technology, and we're going to talk a little about. We're going to talk a little bit about it. The AI adoption. Do you even know if AI is being used in your organization? There was an incident. There was already a HIPAA breach where a doctor went out and used ChatGPT to put in a patient's symptoms with the patient name, and unfortunately anything that's copied into ChatGPT now becomes a part of the system, and it's now in there, and it's part of their modeling. So unfortunately that was a HIPAA violation. Are you blocking ChatGPT with your content filter? Are you blocking artificial intelligence images? The image you see on the right and the image you see throughout this whole presentation, and you can go and the presentation will be available, but all of these images were generated by AI. The image you see on the screen here is actually Microsoft's Copilot's representation of the future of AI in healthcare. And this is the image it came up with. That is exactly what I told it to come up with, is it create me an image of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And that's what you see on the screen here. So we really need to be understanding and knowing where artificial intelligence is being used in the organization, because AI is with us. It's here, whether we like it or not. It's being developed in almost every product. Everybody's looking at how they can capitalize or benefit, or how it's going to make things better. So it's a technology that's going to change healthcare. I believe it's going to revolutionize our lives. It's really going to make a huge impact. How big that impact will be, I'm not real sure, but I think we've got a lot more to go. As we start to get closer and closer to artificial intelligence being more neural and being able to think for itself, we're a ways away from that. I've seen some things that say somewhere in the 2030s, they think it will be able to do that, but we're a long ways from it. So a lot of what we're seeing now is built-in capabilities in the software, great queries in functions like that. But we need to be able to determine what technologies are going to be adopted. So it's good to hear that you guys are already adopting these technologies and thinking about what you're going to do with AI, and making sure that AI aligns to organization goals, and that we're not jumping out and buying AI because it's a buzzword. It's been a buzzword for a few years now, but it's really getting some traction. And we need to make sure that the artificial intelligence as a IT is meeting the goals of the organization and aligning with where the organization strategy is. But with any good technology, we have to think about security. Anything that's great has an opportunity to be bad, and we're starting to see some of that. I've heard of AI being used to replicate voices to do phishing campaigns. or even AI to generate that. So as you look at your pen testing and things, you may want to start looking at the use of AI in evaluating your staff for phishing. Need to start thinking or developing policies governing acceptable use. And Laura's going to tell you a little bit about a policy that's available, but need to start putting AI policies out there and making sure that if AI is appropriate to be in business continuity or disaster recovery or incident response, that we consider it when we start looking at those things. And I like to think about formulary. And one of the things I learned when doing disaster recovery is if you have a secondary site in another location where you're replicating your EMR, what good is your EMR going to be in a downtime situation or when there's something bad if you can't get to formulary or if you can't get to images? So you're going to have to think about AI and how that's going to play into these as well. What level of uptime or availability do you want from these applications if they're being used to make critical decisions? We need to know the threat of AI. So we got to keep up with it. We got to see what's going on in the security world. And then we have to make sure that we're educating our staff and that they understand the benefits of AI, but also the weaknesses and threats of AI. We're probably going to see a lot more threats and security issues coming out of AI as it becomes more prominent. And we need to be aware of those and communicating the threats to our teams. So in conclusion, today we talked about some of the challenges and regulations that are really the needing or basis for why we're needing to streamline our resources efficiently. We got to reduce cost. We got to simplify things so that our resources can better use it. And one of the things I didn't talk about that really in this, when we need to think about when we streamline, is hybrid environments where we're moving appropriate systems to the cloud. So if you're using, an example would be if you're using Exchange on-prem, or your EMR is on-prem and you're seeing that your staff are trying to put out fires every day and stay caught up, this is another opportunity where you could move some of those systems to a trusted cloud provider like email and relieve some of the day-to-day support that's necessary from your resources. So it's another way that you can free up some of your resources. And that's another thing we need to look at as we're looking to streamline these resources efficiently. We talked about simplifying cybersecurity strategy to maximize your resources, addressing AI threats and challenges, and determining your adoption strategies. What criteria are your business leaders making their decisions for adopting AI? And as the organization set that criteria and hold all the decisions to that criteria. Implement AI policies for rural hospitals to maximize capabilities while reducing the risk. So need a policy in place, and then we need to educate everyone on that policy so they're aware of what is acceptable inside of the organization. And again, you may want to look at blocking some of these AI tools. There's several of them out there for images and language. And while there's a lot of great benefit from being able to create a report, there's also a lot of risk that goes along with that. Now Laura's going to talk about the AI security and policy template.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yes, so last year we developed an AI security and privacy policy template for healthcare. And this came about based on a lot of questions we were getting and confusion about how do you put policies in place for AI? It's a great unknown. So we put this together to answer some of those questions that Jonathan posed. It's a 22-page document that is meant to be used and customized to your needs to define the policies for your specific organization. It addresses things like how to take a standardized approach, AI risk assessments, how to train your teams, how to handle incident response related to AI, really all of the areas that you want to address for cybersecurity, but specific to AI. And it does align with all of the frameworks, HIPAA, NIST CSF, and NIST 853. So each section will document which section of those frameworks that it maps back to. So you're welcome to have a copy of this. If you want to email us, again, at that same email, customersfirst@gocloudwave.com, and we'll send you a link to download. Or there is actually a link in the chat if you want to click on that link, the one that says AI policy template, and you can download that right from the session today. And hopefully that you find this useful, and we welcome your feedback on it as well. And just one more reminder, so Cody mentioned that this webinar is part of a series. We will be doing another session on March 20th, and that session will focus on the cybersecurity regulations that have come out in some states and give you an insight into what that looks like in case those are going to be adopted or proposed in other states, as well as the regulations that or the performance goals that just came out from HHS. So we'll share some details about those, and then talk about the shift in responsibility for hospitals and really how it's no longer just the responsibility of the IT team, but how you should be engaging everyone in your organization and making them aware to make your organization safer from cyber attacks. So that'll be on March 20th. You are already registered for that by registering for this webinar, so you can join with your same link for that webinar as well.